On the morning of October 25th, 1415, a cold mist clung to the fields of northern France. The ground was soaked from days of relentless rain. The earth churned into thick mud beneath thousands of boots. In the distance, banners fluttered in the gray wind, the lilies of France and the lions of England, facing each other across a narrow strip of farmland near a small village called Agincourt. On one side stood an army that should not have been there at all. They were tired, many were sick. Their armor was worn, their faces hollow from hunger. Weeks earlier, they had laid siege to the town of Harfleur. Disease had ripped through their ranks. Dysentery had killed more men than the enemy ever had. What began as a proud invasion force had been reduced to barely 6,000 souls. At their head stood a young king, Henry V of England. Only 28 years old, but already hardened by ambition and war. He had crossed the English Channel, determined to claim what he believed was rightfully his, the throne of France. Now surrounded deep inside enemy territory, with an army 3 times his size blocking his path. Many believed this would be the end of him. Across the field waited the might of French nobility, thousands of armored knights, the finest warriors in Europe. They glittered beneath polished steel. Their horses were massive, trained for battle. Their confidence was unshakable. How could a starving English force possibly withstand the crushing power of France's elite? For centuries, armored cavalry had ruled European battlefields. Knights were the embodiment of military dominance, noble, wealthy, and deadly. War was their profession. Honor was their code. And today they expected a glorious victory. But the battlefield itself had other plans. The field between the two armies was narrow, hemmed in by dense woods on either side. Days of rain had transformed the soil into a swamp. Every step sank deep. Every movement demanded effort. Henry V studied the terrain carefully. He understood something his enemies did not. The French numbers would mean nothing if they could not maneuver. He positioned his men in a tight defensive line. At the center stood his men-at-arms, dismounted knights and soldiers prepared to fight on foot. But the true strength of his army stood on the flanks, the longbowmen. Farmers, yeomen. Commoners. Yet they carried a weapon that would change warfare forever. The English longbow was a masterpiece of deadly efficiency. Taller than many of the men who wielded it, it required years of training to master. But in skilled hands, it could launch arrows at terrifying speed, 10, even 12 per minute. The arrows were heavy, iron-tipped, designed to pierce armor at close range. As the sun slowly rose through the mist, tension gripped the field. Hours passed, neither side moved. The French believed time was on their side. The English were exhausted. Hunger would weaken them further. But Henry knew waiting meant death, so he made the first move. The English advanced slightly, planting sharpened wooden stakes into the mud before their archers, a deadly barrier against cavalry charges. The French commanders saw this and could no longer tolerate the insult. The order was given. The French began to move. Thousands of armored men surged forward. Horses struggled immediately in the mud, hooves sinking deep. The weight of steel, sometimes more than 25 kilograms per man, became a curse rather than protection. Then came the sound, a low hum at first, then a roar. The sky darkened, arrows, thousands of them. They fell like a storm. The first wave struck horses and men alike. Animals screamed and collapsed, throwing riders into the mud. Knights struggled to stand, only to be struck again. Shields lifted, armor rang with impact. Some arrows bounced off steel, others found weak points, joints, visors, underarms. Still, the French pushed forward, but the mud betrayed them. Each step became agony. Those in front slowed. Those behind continued pushing. The narrow field compressed the army into a suffocating mass of humanity and steel. Men fell and could not rise. They were trampled, crushed, suffocated beneath the weight of their own comrades. The arrows did not stop. Wave after wave rained down. By the time the French vanguard finally reached the English line, they were exhausted, breathless, disorganized and trapped in thick mud. The clash was brutal. Steel met steel. Swords rang, axes split helmets. But something unexpected happened. The English archers, having emptied quivers upon quivers, dropped their bows. They grabbed mallets, hatchets, and knives, and rushed into the melee. These were not noble knights. They were common men fighting for survival. They attacked fallen French nobles struggling helplessly in the mud. Heavy armor that once symbolized superiority now acted like an anchor. Knights could barely rise without assistance. Many drowned face-first in the mud, unable to lift themselves. Panic spread. The second line of French forces pressed forward, unaware of the disaster unfolding ahead. They too became trapped in the human bottleneck. Hours passed in chaos. At one point, Henry received reports of a possible French attack on the baggage train behind his lines. Fearing encirclement, he made a ruthless decision. He ordered the execution of many captured French prisoners to prevent them from rejoining the fight. It was a grim moment, even by medieval standards, but Henry believed survival demanded it. By late afternoon, the truth was undeniable. The French army had collapsed. The field of Agincourt was covered with bodies, many of them high-ranking nobles whose families had dominated France for generations. Estimates suggest that between 6,000 and 10,000 French soldiers died that day. English losses were minimal in comparison. Against impossible odds, Henry V had achieved a victory that stunned Europe. Agincourt shattered the myth of knightly invincibility. It proved that discipline could defeat arrogance, that terrain could defeat numbers, that technology, while in the form of a simple wooden bow, could overturn centuries of military tradition. The age of armored dominance was fading. Infantry and ranged weapons would shape the future. Though the 100 Years' War would continue for decades, Agincourt became legend. It strengthened Henry's claim to the French throne, and eventually led to the Treaty of Troyes, naming him heir to France. Centuries later, William Shakespeare would immortalize the battle in his play Henry V, giving voice to that cold morning with the famous words of St. Crispin's Day. But long before poetry and legend, there was mud, there was fear, there was steel, and there were arrows falling from a darkened sky. On that October day in 1415, in a narrow field in France, the world of medieval warfare changed forever.